Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 26th, 2025. Time for another show, and guess what? All right, so a cold that I sort of felt rolling in just the other day. This would be a perfect day to take off from the radio, but you can't do that. Not the day after Christmas. I don't know. I didn't plan for it, and I miss you guys, and we were off the air yesterday, and people are getting back to work, or at least wanting to catch up a little bit on the news. And also, by the way, what's really fun about this particular onset of this particular cold, despite the the stuffiness, is if you really actually try to exploit this thing and lean into the microphone and bring it really close. You know how Greg was telling you, we had learned in our media training that if you keep the microphone really close, you can get a very different and deeply resonant voice. And this is the sort of thing, I guess I always sort of wished that would be my voice. When I heard people making careers in voiceover work and announcing, I guess like commercial work, like, how many times has this happened to you? That sort of thing. And I always thought, that'd be a fun way, I think, to make a living. I mean, all you're really doing is reading off of these cards. But, of course, as it turns out, there's a tremendous amount that goes into this, and getting a read right and dealing with directors and 700,000 takes of the same thing. I just said exactly what you told me to say. Why are you making me do it again? I have a booming voice. Shut up. I'm the authority here. It makes it sound like you're the authority here, but you're really not in charge. Anyway, I've never actually pursued that. And also, this is sort of uncomfortable. So anyway, but perhaps today, if we relax the voice and bring the microphone very close, it'll sound like it's a little bit noisy with some extra pops and what do they call that? ASMR. I should be making videos for that. Apparently you can get rich doing somehow. I don't know, but I think it mostly has to be you reading, I don't know, like 50 Shades of Grey scripts or something like that. Anyway, there's plenty going on. I don't know what we're doing wasting our time with this stuff. But Friday, an open slate, a day after a holiday. It's another holiday. It's Boxing Day. It's St. Stephen's Day, as it turns out. I guess it always has been, except I never paid any attention to any of these things. Although I did notice in fishing around for episodes to bring you for yesterday's program slot, which we did take off from the air, I think all of the old summaries of the December 26th shows that we have done are, I think, designated as St. Stephen's Day in Scott's summaries. So he's keeping on top of all these things. I know nothing about it. But one thing I do know, I'm just an unfrozen caveman live streamer / podcaster now. I'm reminded every once in a while by the kids that what's happening here is a live stream, though I'm also recording it for release as a podcast later on. Okay. The kids are keeping me up to date with modern technological marvels of communication like, Truth Social, let's say, which isn't much of a modern marvel, but is where our president has been spending his time. We're going to have to catch up on a few things. It was Christmas yesterday, and Trump was president, so bombs went off somewhere. You knew that was going to be the case, right? I mean, one of the things I discovered in fishing out an old episode to share with you, and we used the December 24th, 2020 broadcast, which reminded me that the last time Donald Trump took the watch, so to speak, had the watch as president of the United States, during Christmas, a major American city exploded. And we've all forgotten about it. Nashville, Tennessee, on Christmas Day 2020, was rocked by an explosion. A guy who had packed an RV full of explosives and parked it downtown and, shattered windows in every direction, for blocks and really took out some major infrastructure there as well. People in the area, when I reminded people of this, when I discovered that there was a thing that I needed to remind people of, said that the area of the blast had only just reopened, essentially. I guess what they say, 2nd Street had only just reopened within a matter of weeks of now. This was 5 years ago that this guy set this off, and nobody ever heard a damn thing about it. We never got to the bottom of, was this a MAGA guy mad about the election? Was it a lone nut that had nothing to do with anything? It almost never really is that, but we never really got to the bottom of it, certainly not as part of any national obsession about it, because we were very quickly moved off of the subject. It may have been that they froze us in place by saying, well, hold on, we don't know the motive yet, and there's no point in speculating. But also, it's probably worth remembering, that less than 2 weeks later, our attention shifted as the President of the United States, then President of the United States, launched an insurrection and sacked the United States Capitol rather than peacefully transfer power to the election winner. So that became a bit of a distraction. I could see us losing our way. And then we focused on that for the time being, for the next 4 years or so, after which all of the people who participated in the thing were pardoned. And I guess if that's not an invitation to lose focus on it, I don't know what is. Not all of the country accepted the invitation to lose focus on January 6th, but the half that wanted to has been working furiously to make sure that not only did we forget what happened, but to the extent we remembered it as a good thing, a patriotic act. It's a bit bizarre, but I don't need to tell you that. Well, I need to tell you something, though, because we've got quite a ways to go on the show. All right, so today may be a good day for diving into some of the long reads that have been waiting behind the scenes, and we can make narrative audio books out of them with this deep, resonant voice that we have available to us today. And perhaps that's what we'll do. On the other hand, there are other entries that are of less immediate impact, let's say, but that might make good background for our rogues gallery. There was a piece today, although it looks like I'm going to have to close out Instapaper and open it up a few times in order to get this thing to register, but an interesting New York Times profile of the Ellisons, Larry and David Ellison, who are, of course, behind the latest incarnation of the media monster that's supposed to be running everything. I don't know. It doesn't seem to have registered here. So while I'm speaking in a lower register, I will register the article, the profile article I was just talking about with. There it is. Finally now showing up in Instapaper. Okay, but the big news from yesterday, let's see. There was, of course, I'll give you the lowdown from NBC News, which reported the less dangerous, I guess, potentially more dangerous, but actually less dangerous of the two events of yesterday. The more dangerous being the actual bombing, and that bombing being a United States campaign allegedly against ISIS, or at least ISIS-aligned terrorists in Nigeria. And, of course, anytime you're dealing in that area of Africa, there's a huge danger that Donald Trump in particular, but any Republican president, very likely to mispronounce in horrific ways the countries we're dealing with. You can imagine. Nigeria being the second most likely to be so mispronounced on his list. The top, of course, being its near neighbor, Niger, if you prefer the Francophone type pronunciation. But anyway, yes, a bombing campaign, and explained to the American public pretty much only as, well, these terrorists were they were slaughtering, as Trump likes to say, slaughtering Christians there's an ongoing battle for sectarian control in the country. And the government of Nigeria points out these terrorists are just basically killing Nigerians that are opposed to them, not necessarily making an attack on them because this group happens to be Christian or practicing Christians, but rather they're just in the way. But the United States, that's the hook we throw onto it when a Republican president wants to do something about this, in an oil-rich nation, whatever. But it being Christmas, I guess he must have thought that was the more interesting hook there. Anyway, of all the things that he did, he communicated these intentions, I guess, most frequently, and very frequently, that over Truth Social. It was a day yesterday in which most people either took a break from social media, which means you might have missed some of this stuff, or in many cases, pare back their participation. It's a slow day, but not for Trump. He was bored and there was nothing to do and there was nothing to sign. And I guess he wasn't playing golf because it was Christmas and he would have really looked like a Grinch if he had made everyone work so that he could play on Christmas. And of course, people would have said, hey, you have like 5 children and I don't know, some tremendous number of grandchildren. It's not huge, but wouldn't you rather other people think you would rather spend your Christmas with the family than out golfing? And wouldn't the, I don't know what, cast of hundreds that has to cater to you if you decide to go golfing rather be spending that time with their families? And the answer is he could staff his golf courses entirely with ISIS terrorists who would not care about Christmas at all. But I don't know. He chooses not to do that for some strange reason. Anyway, instead, now that doesn't mean that he was pressured into spending time with his family. It means that he was pressured into not publicly abandoning his family to go golfing and instead abandoned them to look at his phone. NBC News has a story on this, and it's significant because yesterday was marked by other people on social media complaining that the mainstream media was not covering Trump's obsession with social media yesterday. But that's because, I don't know. I don't really know what the story was, but one good excuse is that all the people who would cover that were spending time with their families. Anyway, now that they're done spending time with their families, they have written this in NBC News, which I don't think Larry Ellison has bought today. Trump rings in Christmas Day, that was yesterday, with a flurry of posts denouncing perceived foes and casting doubt on the 2020 election. The president posted on Truth Social over 100 times overnight, also touting his own economic policies and efforts to end foreign wars, which is interesting because he was starting a foreign war and not being particularly economic about the use of his time. Anyway, Peter Nicholas wrote this up, and it was St. Nicholas we were all concerned with yesterday, so perfect, I guess. Not to say that Peter's any kind of a saint, I'm just saying. Although, as it turns out, there is a St. Peter. It's just not St. Peter Nicholas. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, but he's fairly famous in saint circles. Anyway, Christmas Eve found President Trump in good humor. That's where you were told that Christmas Eve would find him. But we didn't realize why he was in such good humor. Sitting in his Mar-a-Lago home and chatting with children, which he loves doing, girls, on the phone about Santa Claus's whereabouts as NORAD tracked his sleigh. Nice, right? I don't think I can do the Trump voice today. Not in this register, but nice, right? He told reporters after taking a call. Could do this all day long. Talk on the phone? You bet. The festive mood soured later in the day when Trump delivered a Christmas message that included a taunt aimed at, quote, radical left scum. That's you guys. Not me. That's not me. Not me, of course, but you. Who, he wrote, are bent on destroying the country. Now, I'm bent on that, but I'm not scum. You see. I'm just parsing this for you. I do remember seeing that, and I do remember also noting that somebody had a pretty good comment about it, and just basically reminding everybody that remember when the mainstream media was fairly sure that it was the crime of the century to have referred to some of Donald Trump's supporters as deplorables, but it seems to be fine for the president of the United States to take to social media and say everybody who opposes him from the other side of the aisle is radical left scum. But, there are a lot of things that he takes a lot of privilege with, and this is just one of them. The other one is also related to religion, though, even though it wasn't him. I saw some very interesting threads yesterday. We'll see if we can tie this all together for you. But in the meantime, what does NBC have to tell us? The festive mood soured later in the day as Christmas itself drew nearer, and something, I hate you radical leftist scum. After midnight, now on Christmas, the holiday spirit took another partisan political turn. The president posted or reposted more than 100 times on his Truth Social website. Now, he should have been in bed. This is how Santa Claus, when he's coming to town, can see you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. And now it's easier than ever. If you're posting on social media, you're awake. Now, it doesn't say in the song what happens if he finds out that you're awake, but you're not supposed to get any presents. But with Trump, it's a win-win, I guess, because if you're bad, you get coal, and he loves that. Beautiful, clean coal, as he tells the kids. So after midnight, 100 more posts on Truth Social, in many cases amplifying messages of Christmas cheer? No, disparaging perceived political foes. Duh. As Christmas Day broke, the president made clear he is still captivated by his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. No. He reposted one message that called for Attorney General Pam Bondi to ensure, quote, accountability by prosecuting former Democratic President Barack Obama over the election. That is interesting. Over the 2020 election? Really? He also shared a video from Colton Moore, a Georgia state senator running for the congressional seat being vacated by Republican murderer Trader Green. Donald Trump was right the entire time, Moore said in his video. The election in 2020 was stolen. They usually just decline to say that it wasn't, but, he's affirmatively saying it was. He went on to say that people need to be arrested and tried for treason, a lot of them. And he's one of them. No evidence has emerged of wrongdoing on a scale that would have changed the outcome of the 2020 election, in case you thought we were changing positions on this. We're not. Though Trump said in June that he wants a special prosecutor to investigate what happened. He was given the opportunity to leave a special prosecutor behind in the person of Sidney Powell after the 2020 election, but he did decline to do so. Anyway, he yelled at a bunch of other people as well, and I don't know whether we're going to linger on who else some of these things are a little bit crazy. I hadn't had any idea about some of the other claims he was making. But generally speaking, he spent far too much time on there, even for a civilian. Now, given the fact that he was president of the United States and at the same time, as I said, bombing Nigeria, well, that probably should have kept his attention, and also probably should have kept him quiet. He, of course, tends to go the opposite direction. About Nigeria, the New York Times reports from Helene Cooper, Saiku Jame, and Eric Schmidt team up. Hopefully I got Saiku's name close to correct. For the piece on Nigeria, U.S. strikes ISIS, which we've taken to calling all of the Islamic State organizations, even though the second IS in there was, as I recall, was for in Syria. Now, an Islamic State in Syria, in Nigeria, it rhymes, but it doesn't make any particular sense. But no one wants to call it ISIN. I think for a while, remember when they tried to call it ISIL, Islamic State in Levant, when it was operating elsewhere, and, well, in the Levant, anyway. And it just didn't stick. It didn't make any sense. People couldn't understand it, or just couldn't, I don't know. Whatever it was, they weren't comfortable with it. Anyway, now the U.S. is striking ISIS in Nigeria after Trump warned of attacks on Christians. The attack comes after President Trump ordered the Defense Department, which, that's cool of them in the New York Times to call it the Defense Department, ordered the Defense Department last month to prepare to intervene militarily in Nigeria to protect Christians from Islamic militants. But you should really protect anyone from militants. The United States launched a number of strikes against the Islamic State in northwestern Nigeria. President Trump announced on Thursday, Christmas, they don't bother saying it that way, the latest, if it was the last American military campaign against a non-state adversary, we'd be in better shape, perhaps, but no, it's just the latest. In this case, Islamic jihadis, who the president asserts have been slaughtering Christians. Of course, he also asserts that all the boats he's blowing up in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific are loaded with drugs and run by gang members, and, we don't really believe him. Mr. Trump said in a post on Truth Social, because that's how he spoke all day long, that the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum, there's that again, in northwest Nigeria, who've been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians at levels, oh boy, shouldn't be laughing in the middle of this, but at levels not seen for many years and even centuries. So he was thinking crusades, I think, in his mind, which, is resonant with the Pete Hegseth and his crusader tattoos, I guess. But a very interesting way of putting it, let's say that. The strike involved more than a dozen Tomahawk cruise missiles fired off a Navy ship in the Gulf of Guinea, hitting insurgents in 2 ISIS camps in northwest Nigeria's Sokoto state, according to a U.S. military official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss operational matters. They have no spokesperson who can speak on operational matters. The operation was done in coordination with the Nigerian military, the official said, and that's kind of an important point. It's not that we did it without their knowledge and just snuck in there and blew things up, and who cares whether we get their agreement or not. They knew and they coordinated in some way. So I guess that's better than usual. In a statement, U.S. Africa Command said its initial assessment concluded that, quote, multiple ISIS terrorists were killed in the strike. Well, that's nice. It's usually I probably would be against launching a strike against individual terrorists there, unless, of course, it was the number 1 in Al-Qaeda or the number 2. It's number 2 is the usual target. And, anyway, sometimes we do it that way. The U.S. Africa Command is working with our Nigerian and regional partners to increase counterterrorism cooperation efforts related to ongoing violence and threats against innocent lives, General Dagvin Anderson, the commander of U.S. Africa Command, said in a statement, our goal is to protect Americans and disrupt violent extremist organizations wherever they are. I don't think there were any Americans at risk in the area, but, the hook was it's Christmas and we're killing people who kill Christians. They kill everybody, and some of the people that were recently killed were Christians, and so, but we don't know any other holidays. So that's what we're going to go with. If they kill anybody named Steven today, or boxers, perhaps, then they might really be in trouble. The attack occurred in a region along the border with Niger, where a branch of ISIS called the Islamic State Sahel, I guess, not Sahel, but Sahel, and that I guess reference to that region. We brought that up the other day. I think the Sahel region came up in some other discussion. Anyway, that would just make them ISS, which is also the International Space Station, and just make things even more confusing. So we just say ISIS in Nigeria. And they have been attacking both government forces and civilians, according to Caleb Weiss, a counterterrorism analyst and editor with FDD's Long War Journal. The U.S. operation inside Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria, followed months of growing allegations by Christian evangelical groups and senior Republicans, same thing, that Christians were being targeted in widespread violence. An insurgency there has gone on for more than a decade, killing thousands of Christians and Muslims across sectarian lines. The Nigerian authorities have rejected allegations of a Christian genocide, noting that the web of violent armed groups with different motives and spread across the country kills as many Muslims as Christians. However, Nigerian officials have stepped up engagement with the U.S. in recent weeks after Mr. Trump ordered the Defense Department in November to prepare to intervene militarily in Nigeria to protect Christians, but nobody else. The Christmas Day attack, that's how you protect Christians, came after the U.S. had been conducting intelligence gathering surveillance flights over large parts of Nigeria since late November, according to the military official. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth wrote in a post on social media, that's how you communicate these days, the president was clear last month. He's muddled now, but he was clear last month. The killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria, parentheses, and elsewhere, must end. And then, of course, he tags himself as Department of War, is always ready. So ISIS found out tonight on Christmas. He added, more to come. Kimyebi Ebienfa. Kimyebi Ebienfa is my best guess. Said a spokesman for Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said in a post that the precision strikes on terrorist targets in Nigeria were carried out in coordination with the Nigerian government. Terrorist violence in any form, whether directed at Christians, Muslims, or other communities, remains an affront to Nigeria's values and to international peace and security. That at least still, I think, holds true largely. The strikes in Nigeria mark the second time in a week that Mr. Trump has ordered American military retaliation against a branch of the Islamic State. Last week, the United States carried out dozens of airstrikes against the Islamic State in Syria, the actual ISIS, I guess, fulfilling the president's vow to avenge the deaths of 2 army soldiers and a civilian interpreter killed in a terrorist attack there earlier in the month. U.S. Africa Command, responding to Mr. Trump's orders in November, drew up the options for targeting insurgents in Nigeria, forwarded them to the Pentagon and the White House. The options included airstrikes of the few known compounds in northern Nigeria inhabited by militant groups, officials said. But even as the plans were being drawn up, American military officials said it was doubtful that they would have much long-term impact because of the entrenched nature of the conflict. So, a couple of flyovers isn't going to do it. The violence in the northwest region where the strikes occurred is driven in large part by armed bandits and gangs kidnapping for ransom. The insurgency is concentrated in the northeast, where jihadist groups like the notorious Boko Haram, that one we've heard of before, and its now more powerful splinter, the Islamic State West Africa province, which we're not using the initials there either because that one's already taken. That would be Islamic State WAP, and that's not what people are talking about when they use those initials. An affiliate of the Islamic State group, so it's a multi-level marketing kind of a thing. They have killed tens of thousands of civilians over the past decade. Nigeria is not officially at war, but more people are killed there than in most war-torn countries. Of course, they have more people than most countries in Africa, the most. More than 12,000 people were killed by various violent groups this year alone, according to Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, a conflict monitoring group. On Wednesday, a suspected suicide bomber detonated an explosive device during evening prayers in a mosque at a market in, Maiduguri, maybe, the capital of Borno State in the northeast of Nigeria. Nigerian government officials said 5 were killed, dozens injured. The local media said at least 12 people were buried on Thursday, citing residents. Mr. Trump in his Truth Social post said that, quote, under my leadership, our country will not allow radical Islamic terrorism to prosper. He added, may God bless our military and Merry Christmas, in all caps there, to all, including the dead terrorists, of which there will be many more if their slaughter of Christians continues. But if you kill Zoroastrians or Jews and Buddhists, you might be able to get away with it, I guess. I don't know. That's it. Well, that's your Merry Christmas message. I found that disturbing, to say the least. Even more disturbing is the fact that we have talked all the way through the break, which means that my effort to turn on the alarms didn't go very well. And, those of you listening via podcast will hear all of the background to the attacks, our attacks launched in northwestern Nigeria over the Christmas holiday. And the rest of you will have to wait, I guess. Or those of you listening will have to wait. Okay. I mean, we learned a little bit, and then we heard the more important part of it was what was America subject to via social media, thanks to our declining president. A Merry Christmas message, including Merry Christmas to all the dead terrorists. It's probably the least Merry Christmas they've ever had. So many people are saying, and that he's not saying that anymore, by the way. I did notice that over the break as well. Many people are saying that he no longer uses the verbal crutch. Many people are saying, and I think I'm curious about whether or not this has to do with sort of the shrinking of his, mental range and his cognitive world, perhaps, or might just represent a shift in it. But there were a lot of things I noticed. Just thinking back to his first presidency, that prior to the presidency, he used to say, and we made fun of it all the time, saying huge, it's going to be huge, and he just sort of stopped using huge as a word. I mean, he never did. He used huge as a word instead. But he kind of stopped using it in his presidency, and I'm not certain what that had to do with anything. But he, one of his favorite verbal crutches is, of course, saying many people say, to make it sound like the things he was proposing are actually very popular when they're not. And I don't know. One theory is that, he's just losing track of the various verbal crutches that he's got. He's clinging to a few others. And, still saying, like you've never seen before, or falling back on percentages and saying he's cutting things by 10 billion% or whatever. But it's been a while, I think, since I have noticed him saying the many people are saying thing. And another theory that was floated back to me when I talked about it on social media was, well, maybe what's actually happening here is as he becomes increasingly authoritarian, he no longer feels like he has to fake popularist credentials for his initiatives. Many people are saying this would be a great thing to do, so that's why I'm doing it. I'm lying about that, but that would be the construction there. But now it doesn't matter whether many people are saying it or not. I'm the dictator. I'm saying it, and that's enough. And I thought that was a pretty plausible theory, too, for the shift, if there has indeed been one. All right, so we've taken care of the actual business of the day, things that we're bombing, and his irresponsible social media presence on a day like yesterday, and adopting exactly the stance exactly opposite from what you would have thought a dignified leader of the free world might have done. I should also report, by the way, and maybe I'll use this write-up for it, that one of the original gang, or the OG, the original gangster type liberal bloggers from back in the day, which I guess we sort of put the origin of liberal blogging right around the early 2000s. Howie Klein, longtime netroots denizen, as we sometimes say, has passed away. And maybe I'll share with you the Variety write-up about that, not primarily written up in Variety for his blogging prowess, but we'll take it. But he, of course, was prior, I guess, to, and I guess during much of his blogging career, but prior to his blogging career, became famous in the music industry and kind of kept that passion going all along. But many of you will remember Howie Klein and his various efforts in blogging. And I wonder, does Wikipedia has an entry on him, and I'm sort of wondering, just do they have a section on his blogging career, or it's mostly focused on his music career instead? But all right. Well, at any rate, I thought perhaps the Variety article might be a interesting way of marking his passing. And if you didn't have the good fortune to encounter him online, well, what can I tell you? Maybe you were a late comer to this whole thing, or just turning your attention elsewhere. But what's fascinating about him was, I don't know, he brought up the career every once in a while, and he was also very famous for in the blogging community for raising money for various either campaign events or whatever, and was offering up very often to raffle off essentially to people who donated. They would be entered for a chance to win some piece of music career memorabilia. Howie Klein, Variety reports, top executive at Sire and is it Reprise Records? I never did straighten out that whole pronunciation, but also DJ and political activist, they point out, dies at 77. Jem Aswad has put this piece together for Variety. I don't know if I hope it's not paywalled. I didn't check. Doesn't look like it. Howie Klein, veteran record executive, radio DJ, and political activist, who was a leader of the famously artist-friendly Warner Music family during its golden era in the 1980s and early 90s. Died on Wednesday after a long battle with pancreatic cancer, according to a social media post from his sister. He was 77. He was a top executive at Sire Records during the label's peak era, a time when the label had everyone from the Smiths and Depeche Mode to Madonna and Lou Reed on its roster, and later was president of Warner's Reprise label from 1989 to 2001. He was a co-founder of the San Francisco-based 415 Records during the 1970s and was a strong and vocal presence in the music industry's anti-censorship efforts in the late 1980s and early 90s, focusing on political activism in his later years, which is how we got to know him. Born in Brooklyn in 1948, Klein began his music career at Long Island's Stony Brook University, where he began writing about music and later booked many legendary artists to perform at the school, a list that reads like a rock and roll hall of fame from the late 1960s. The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, Otis Redding, Pink Floyd, The Doors, Janis Joplin, The Grateful Dead, Tim Buckley, Jackson Browne, and many others. Damn, good job. He spent several years traveling in Asia and Europe before settling in San Francisco in 1976. And there he became a popular DJ at the city's KSAN-FM and was a vocal supporter of the city's then nascent punk and alternative scenes. On the station, he interviewed such acts as the Sex Pistols, Devo, Iggy Pop, The Cramps, and others. In 1978, he founded the San Francisco-based 415 Records, which released singles and albums by Romeo Void, Wire Train, The Nuns, Translator, and others, several of which were distributed by major labels. And the Variety website a little slow in responding to my efforts to scroll through the story for some strange reason. But, of course, that would be just par for the course here on the show on Friday. Okay, I don't know. For some reason, it's totally frozen, and I think it's probably frozen largely because of pop-up ads that ruin everything on the internet, ever. So, okay. Wow. Okay, is it going to scroll? No, it's going to scroll in the opposite direction. Perfect. All right. Well, crawling along here. I have a large span of advertisements that I need to scroll past. But more about his record career. Very little, I think, in this one likely about his blogging career, although I'd like to get down there and find out. But at any rate, if you remember Howie Klein's contributions to the netroots in general, good for you. Hope it's a pleasant memory. It should be. And if you missed the whole thing, it's something you can back up and check out. All right. I guess if things are going to be super slow in processing, we might as well get into a long read elsewhere on a site that might actually cooperate with us and see what we can offer you by way of long reads that have not yet had their chance in the sun. There are several. And, as I'm scrolling through a bunch of them, trying to figure out which one to offer you, my mind is flipping through a number of other things that I remembered yesterday. Oh, we haven't gotten to this one yet or not. At any rate, let's try see how Vox cooperates with us this morning and see whether we can get through this medium length piece. Boy, everything is just processing slow. It's not, I guess we won't blame Variety necessarily. everything seems to be taking quite a while to render on the site. That's too bad. All right, well, it's just a slow internet morning here. Maybe everybody's on Amazon.com returning things. Let's flip back to the Instapaper version of Zach Beauchamp's piece from, I think this was a couple of days ago, and it might have been one that we found in linking to something else that he was, I remember calling his name just the other day, and some other previous article that he referred to in one of his, in whatever it was we were reading, where Trump's war on democracy is failing, which I thought was an interesting take given how much success everyone is crediting him with in his war on democracy. Boy, everything is really crawling. So we'll have to read the Instapaper version of this. If you want to understand how the U.S. government works today, you should study. Oh, is this? Now this one. This one occurs to me as, did we read this one, or did we read? I feel like now I can't tell whether we read this one and kept the other one. Oh yes, that's right. Okay, this was the one about his describing haphazardism, and I'm fairly certain we did read this. Why we left it here? I wonder whether we didn't finish reading it. That may be it. Oh boy. Well, it's a lot easier to tell if the thing will open up on the web view and we can recognize it that way. This is rather unusual, or rather annoying. But okay, we may just have to skip this entirely because I can't tell whether this is the one we went over or the one that was referenced by, or maybe this is the one that referenced us elsewhere and I kept it for that reason. Ordinarily, I would have archived it by now so that this doesn't happen on the air. All right. Well, you can see there's a lot going on these days, and the cold isn't helping any. All right. Why don't we try this one then? Will the New York Times render for us the Ellison's story? Nope. Wow. This is going to make things difficult. Hopefully during the break we can maybe straighten some of this stuff out. But goodness, the Instapaper version of this thing will still be available. I don't know. I thought this was a good addition to the Rogues Gallery thing, just to try to understand the Ellisons and what they were doing behind the scenes. A father, a son, and their $108 billion push for media moguldom. According to the Instapaper version before me, Theodore Schleifer at the New York Times is responsible for this one. Probably wise to check in on who are these guys besides just a bunch of billionaires. Larry and David Ellison, it turns out, didn't always have a close relationship. Now they're one of the most intriguing partnerships in business, we're told. When David Ellison became a teenager, his father, Larry, bought him a gift not usually bestowed on a 13th birthday, his own Katana stunt plane. You're right, that is a new one. The two had spent little meaningful time together, but with their own aircraft, the father and son could bond in the air, practicing aerobatic flips and ruling the skies together. That's a nice plan. I mean, if you could make it work. Now, Larry Ellison is trying to help buy his son a media empire so they can rule Hollywood and news together. It is sort of interesting watching, David Ellison be the name behind the takeover of all this stuff, but Larry Ellison being the money. And, it's a little unusual, let's say. David's old enough, you would think, to stand on his own, but he hasn't amassed nearly the kind of fortune that his father has because he hasn't had to. His father's just giving it to him. It's one of the things you can do if you have billions and billions of dollars. So what was once a relatively weak father and son relationship has transformed, and I guess that's nice for them, into one of modern media's most intriguing business partnerships, towering behind almost every move made by David Ellison, now 42, and chief executive of Paramount, because his dad bought it and gave it to him, is his swaggering 81-year-old father, the billionaire co-founder of the software giant Oracle. The two have formed an unusual tag team in their pursuit of major media deals, according to more than 24 people with knowledge of their interactions. They bought Paramount this summer And now they are hunting Warner Brothers Discovery with a $108 billion hostile bid. On Monday, David Ellison made it clearer than ever that his father is the centerpiece of this bid, telling Warner Brothers that Larry Ellison personally guaranteed $40.4 billion personally for Paramount's offer. David Ellison has referred to the deal as something we, or the Ellison family, were pursuing, and I guess credit there. Both have sought to arm twist Warner executives. Father and son speak about 5 times a week, sometimes about their tennis matches or their joint philanthropy at the University of Oxford. But these days, often the topic is deal-making. David Ellison consults his father at length on every deal-related decision. Well, why not? He's paying for it. One person with knowledge of the interaction said they discuss how to navigate President Trump, whose administration must approve any major acquisition. Larry Ellison has taken the lead in making the case to the president for why Paramount, and not Netflix, its rival bidder, should win control of Warner Brothers, 2 people said. Mr. Trump has pledged to be, quote, involved in any decision about whether to approve a deal. A Silicon Valley celebrity for decades, Mr. Ellison co-founded Oracle 5 decades ago and turned it into a $252 billion personal fortune. He has been deferential to his son on this year's deal talks. A person close to the process said, "Come on, Dad, let me do it for myself. You pay, but let me do the talking." When talking about the hostile bid for Warner Brothers, he's often referred to his history of hostile acquisitions during the 1990s and 2000s. 2 people with knowledge of the discussion said his son, who interned at Oracle for 2 summers during that time, lucky him, watched him work through some deals, the people said. So not just any intern. He got to watch him do all of his merger and acquisition work. Okay. If the Ellisons prevail, their business empire could range from CNN to Warner Brothers to TikTok. That could have enormous consequences for the news and entertainment industries, perhaps making the Ellisons as influential as the Murdochs, whose media dynasty operates Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, and other major outlets. Yikes. Mr. Trump has privately said Larry Ellison assured him that he would turn CBS News, which the Ellisons took over when they bought Paramount, into a more conservative outlet. 2 people with knowledge of the president's comments said, and witness what happened, I guess, at CBS, and see what you make of that. On Sunday night, for instance, a 60 Minutes correspondent accused David Ellison's hand-picked editor-in-chief of CBS News, Barry Weiss, of making a political decision to hold a story about Venezuelan men deported by the Trump administration, to CCOT, of course. Ms. Weiss told colleagues on a call on Monday that she had held the segment because it wasn't ready. Sure. David Ellison, born in 1983, was largely raised in Woodside, a town in Silicon Valley, by his father's 3rd wife, Barbara. She and Larry Ellison maintained a warm relationship after their divorce in 1986, several people close to the family say, but he was not a day-to-day presence in his son's life. Oracle colleagues did not hear him talk often about David, who, when he was 23, said there had been gaps. That's the quote, gaps in their relationship growing up. It wasn't until the 2 began taking flight lessons together that they grew close. That's nice, right? "I'm afraid I must have passed on the risk-taking gene," Larry Ellison said about their shared daredevil interest in 2006. Now, normally, when you take flight lessons together, it's about flying safely, but apparently stunt flying. Why can we take a dangerous occupation that we try to drill the safety into your head over and over again and make it more dangerous and showy? Stunt flying, that's how. All right. David Ellison dropped out of the University of Southern California's film school. Did you know that? And started an acting career. Oh, I didn't realize that had been part of his life, but acting. All right. Very interesting. Good choice. But I guess he didn't stick with it. His father heavily financed his first major movie as an actor. That'll happen. Flyboys. Do you remember this one? I don't know. It was widely considered a flop, apparently. Larry Ellison was relieved when his son left acting and didn't want to spend all his money on that. But then he decided, I want you to buy me a media empire instead. And I guess at heart, Larry Ellison must have said, I'd like to own a media empire, so I'll agree to finance this thing. Sure, why not? Their relationship grew warmer as David Ellison achieved professional success, if that's what you call it.
That's what they said anyway. Larry Ellison has always considered himself wise about Hollywood. And why not? He's a very rich person. So he considers himself wise about everything, I would guess. And one of his best friends, Steve Jobs, mentored the son about the business as well. So you'd think he'd be more accomplished in business if he was mentored by Larry Ellison and Steve Jobs. But, he's not. So what can you do? Where do we leave off with this? Yes. Larry Ellison was initially skeptical of Skydance, the Hollywood company that his son started and that bought Paramount. But he has told his friends in recent years that he considers his son to be one of the smartest people in the business world. Wow. Trusts his judgment and tends to agree with him on corporate matters, several people with knowledge of the Ellison said. Larry is one of the smartest people I've ever met, but I honestly think David may be even smarter, said a person that they said you should definitely call a reporter and tell this to, whose name is Mark Benioff, Benioff, the chief executive of Salesforce, and a mentee of Larry Ellison, who said he has known David since he was 3. Wow. In recent years, Larry Ellison has invited his close circle of friends to join his son for Saturday dinners at his beachside spread on Carbon Beach in Malibu, California, often followed by a movie, which everyone loves. A person with knowledge of the activities said, and David Ellison, in turn, has sought out personal and medical advice from his father, who considers himself, why not, knowledgeable about healthcare. A few years ago, he called his father for help on how to handle a friend's medical emergency during a tennis match. People with knowledge of the incident recalled. I don't know if this is such a glowing report. Larry Ellison, maybe it's not meant to be. Larry Ellison mostly stayed behind the scenes at Skydance. He invested an undisclosed amount in the company as early as 2006, his son has said, and even more during a $150 million fundraising round in 2010 that made him the largest shareholder. He gave me an incredible opportunity. He certainly did. By believing in me in the beginning, David Ellison said in an interview in 2022, I could not be more grateful for that, and we definitely talk about work constantly and work together constantly. Yeah, they talk about work constantly, and they also work constantly. I mean, it makes more sense than you think, just from reading it. But it's just poorly said. Maybe he used AI to write it. Today, Paramount's board, David Ellison's bosses, include the head of his family office, Paul Marinelli, and Oracle's former chief executive, Safra Katz. So I guess his bosses aren't really his bosses. That's what they're saying. Larry Ellison's experiences with the press have had him, too, thinking about the news business. He was often frustrated by what he saw as sensationalized coverage about him and his personal life, several people close to him said. He only really respected publications like the Financial Times or The Economist. Parenthetically, it says Oracle often advertised on the back page of The Economist. In more recent years, he became more antagonistic about the press, as they began to write, I guess, more and more true things about how weird he is. His son appears to share some of those same feelings. He has told people privately that CBS News could improve its finances if it was perceived as less liberal. He hired Ms. Weiss, the founder of the Free Press, an upstart digital news site, and a regular critic of traditional news organizations to lead CBS News. Those criticisms of CBS News also line up with those lodged by Mr. Trump, as it happens, who has forged a close relationship with Larry Ellison. Mr. Ellison was once a stalwart Clinton-era Democrat, but he has gravitated toward Mr. Trump in large part because of the president's support for Israel. Several people who have spoken to him said both Ellisons are close to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, whom one associate described as like an uncle figure to David Ellison. Okay. David Ellison is still leaning hard on his father to help him with Mr. Trump, who could spoil his father's generosity. Mr. Trump and Larry Ellison speak frequently. People close to Mr. Trump and Mr. Ellison's operation said Mr. Ellison has become frustrated at times this year by Mr. Trump's trade policies. But in recent conversations with the president, he has been obsequious, one of the people said. Oh, well, that'll help. A White House official said Mr. Trump's conversations with Mr. Ellison were being mischaracterized. Oh. The official declined to be named or to elaborate. The Paramount deal team only occasionally discusses how to take advantage of the relationship with Mr. Trump, according to a person close to Larry Ellison. But Larry spoke to the president about Warner Brothers Discovery after Netflix announced its deal to buy the company, according to the a White House official and a person close to Mr. Trump. So far, though, the efforts by the father and son do not necessarily seem to be having the desired effect. Oh, no. For those people that think I am close with the new owners of CBS, oh dear, is this Trump? Yeah. Oh, okay. So if you think that, understand that 60 Minutes has treated me far worse since the so-called takeover. Is that right? No. Than they have ever treated me before. Mr. Trump wrote on social media last week, if they are friends, I'd hate to see my enemies. I'd love to see them. Wow. Okay. So that gets us to the bottom of this, which is fantastic because the break is coming up. By the way, apparently, the author of this piece, Theodore Schleifer, apparently has the beat of writing about billionaires in America for the New York Times, which is an interesting, I didn't realize that was a beat all to itself, but I guess that makes a certain amount of sense. And, wow. All right. So anyway, our break is coming up, and thankfully the break music is controlled by a totally different computer than the one that is choking, literally choking on the tabs I have opened up here. I could use a 2-minute break, but all we've got is the 1 minute, even though we skipped the last break. I can't carry that over. I could use a 3-minute break to close down the computer and reboot it, but I don't know if we're going to be able to make that happen during the 1-minute break, which is going to just leave us in exactly the same position, stuck in Instapaper and only Instapaper, and able only to read things from there. All right. I do want to turn back to the Jeffrey Epstein story because that continues in the news as well. And there's an entry from Julie K. Brown, who's the most important and maybe sometimes singularly important reporter in the whole thing. With the flurry of news happening in the Epstein zone at this point, trust her to cut through the clutter, I think. And that too, apparently, actually I think just before the Christmas break, but after our pre-Christmas show, we found out that, oh, hey, the Justice Department announced that they found over 1 million, was it 1 million additional pages, additional documents that they hadn't released before or shared with anyone before. I think they largely cover the same material because there's only one subject really of the Epstein Files over and over and over again in different forms and being done to different people and different levels of criminality involved. But another 1 million pages of documents that, oops, no one's ever seen before. So, there's an awful lot of clutter and a lot of interesting writing that perhaps we'll catch up with when we talk to Greg again on Monday about how much better this could have been done if they actually wanted to help the public clarify what happened in and around Jeffrey Epstein's world. They don't. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. This is going to be awfully difficult with this computer totally frozen, and even my efforts to shut it down haven't worked. So that's unfortunate. And now there's every chance really that this thing will shut down in the middle of our attempt to read the next article, which is thanks to Julie K. Brown, published in the Miami Herald. But guess what? It's already not working. As Epstein's cushy jail sentence raised concerns, his lawyers went on a charm offensive. We were wondering about this the other day, and I think Greg actually brought up that what we really need to get to the bottom of is who helped arrange his very lenient sentencing the first time the criminal justice system caught up with him on his sex trafficking charges, and why the names of the lawyers who were doing this work were being redacted out of the document releases. I thought, good question. Ben Weider, is it Weider or Weider? Wieder, and Julie K. Brown teamed up for this thing, published just before Christmas in the Miami Herald. Jeffrey Epstein's team of high-powered lawyers famously negotiated a lenient, to say the least, 2007 deal on his behalf with federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida that allowed the financier to avoid a lengthy prison sentence and plead guilty to only 2 state charges to settle allegations that he had abused dozens of teenage girls. Never-before-seen documents released this week by the Department of Justice as part of the so-called Epstein Files show how his attorneys continued to try to influence federal prosecutors even after his deal was finalized, and mixed personal and business relationships with the attorneys who had agreed to settle Epstein's case. While federal prosecutors pushed back against Epstein's lawyers, at the end of the day, Epstein got what he wanted. In mid-November of 2008, nearly 5 months after Epstein began his sentence at the Palm Beach County Jail, his attorney, Jay Lefkowitz, wrote to one of the Florida prosecutors on the case asking if the prosecutor could meet the week of Thanksgiving. And I guess already we're in trouble here as he's beginning a sentence at the Palm Beach County Jail, which is not a place that you're going to see people spending long stretches of years. The county jail would be more for short-term incarceration. So already you're thinking you're in the wrong category. Category error here. This is somebody who needs to be put away for years and years and years and years at a time in the state penitentiary. What's he doing in the county jail? All right. So already indicative of problems. So mid-November 2008, 5 months after he begins his sentence, Jay Lefkowitz, his attorney, writes to one of the Florida prosecutors in the case asking if they could meet on the week of Thanksgiving. Do we need to discuss anything related to Mr. Epstein? Or is this purely a social visit? Asked the prosecutor, whose name is redacted. Why? We don't know. And good question. Lefkowitz replied that he would be seeing Epstein and would provide the prosecutor updates on his client. So I guess business. But this is interesting. Talk about your mixing. But primarily, Lefkowitz wrote, I thought we could have a social visit for once. Except also discuss my, most dangerous client. Lefkowitz didn't respond to multiple requests for comment. His correspondence with the unnamed prosecutor came roughly 1 week before the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida wrote to another of Epstein's prominent attorneys, Roy Black, to raise a significant issue. They learned that Epstein had applied for and been admitted to a work release program through the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, which operated the county jail. Under the terms of this program, Epstein was ultimately able to spend up to 12 hours a day, now that's half the day, 6 days a week, working at a nearby office that he rented in West Palm Beach while he was serving his sentence. Epstein allegedly continued to abuse girls at this West Palm Beach office while still technically serving his incarceration. That does seem counter to the idea of incarceration, don't you think? How about if instead of being in jail, you go to an office that you rent and maintain and continue to commit the crimes for which you're in jail now? Well, that sounds like a very good deal. I think I'll take it. In the November 14th, 2008 letter, the U.S. Attorney's Office wrote that Epstein's participation in the program is they got this right, a material breach of his deal with the government. Part of his agreement required that he spend his incarceration in jail, not on work release. Well, gee whiz, that is awfully tough. Accordingly, the United States demands that Mr. Epstein withdraw his application to participate in the program and complete his 18-month term of imprisonment, the letter states. Again, interestingly, the U.S. Attorney's Office is involved here, which means it's a federal prosecution, but he's serving his time in the county jail, not the state penitentiary where a longer sentence would go, or the federal penitentiary where a longer federal sentence would have landed him. But the county jail, there's something wrong with the execution of his sentence even before the work release comes up. Well, anyway, neither of those things that the U.S. Attorney's Office said should happen, completing his sentence in jail and not being out on work release, none of those things would happen. Epstein continued to participate in the program, and he was released from custody after only 13 months. Roy Black, could have answered these questions, but for the fact that he's dead. He died earlier this year. How do you like that? Next section here is entitled A Relaxed Drink and Conversation. It wasn't the first time federal prosecutors discussed the conditions of Epstein's incarceration with his attorneys. The letter indicates that they raised concerns about it in June of 2008 in his plea deal with the state. As his plea deal was being finalized, it wouldn't be the last time either. Another of Epstein's attorneys, Alan Dershowitz, who kept his underwear on the whole time, met for a drink in March of 2009 with an attorney from the U.S. Attorney's Office who Dershowitz identified as Jeffrey Sloman, the then deputy U.S. attorney in Miami. Sloman was at the time overseeing the Epstein case and succeeded Alexander Acosta as the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida 2 months later. Dershowitz wrote to Sloman after their meeting. And what did he write? It was so nice having a relaxed drink and conversation on the porch of our neighborhood bistro. Dershowitz wrote, I appreciate your kind words of advice, encouragement, and friendship. That's interesting, too. Dershowitz, I thought, was based to the north, but I guess not. His neighborhood bistro is in the jurisdiction of the Southern District of Florida, as it turns out. So, okay. But the visit wasn't all social, though he probably kept his underwear on for most of that one as well. I especially appreciate your assurance that the feds will not interfere with how the Palm Beach sheriff administers Jeffrey's sentence, as long as he's treated like any similarly situated inmate, which he wasn't. Dershowitz added, misspelling Epstein's name somehow. Oh, Jeffrey, right. Well, first of all, he doesn't even capitalize it, but then he adds an extra E in there somewhere. My understanding is that if the sheriff were to decide in the normal course of events that the circumstances warranted Jeffrey completing the custodial portion of his sentence under, let's say, alternative custody / in-home detention, your office would not intrude. I don't know why. But that's his understanding. They may have said that. Sloman responded saying that he looked, quote, forward to maintaining and growing our friendship. I'm not certain why that is. Maybe it was out of respect for the fact that he kept his underwear on the whole time. I don't know. But he wanted to maintain and grow his friendship with the odious Dershowitz. Who knows why exactly that would happen? If the office was contacted to offer their position on Epstein being allowed to serve out the remainder of his sentence in alternative custody or in-home detention, Sloman wrote, we will object. Oh, how interesting is that? Well, so Dershowitz is wrong. So Dershowitz writes back the following day with a compliment. You are a real mensch. Okay. Do I understand this correctly? Let me read this again. Okay, I skipped a part here that was would have been helpful here. I'm sorry about that. This is a hell of a day here. Maybe my head isn't really clear enough to do this, but I've undertaken to do it, so here we go. So Sloman says he looked forward to maintaining and growing the friendship. He went on to say that the U.S. Attorney's Office will not interfere with how the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office administers the sentence imposed by the court. Why did he say that? I don't know, but he did. But he added, this does not mean that the U.S. Attorney's Office condones or encourages the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office to mitigate the terms and conditions of a sentence. Okay. If the office was contacted to offer their position, we will object. But, okay, I guess what he's saying, what Dershowitz is saying you're a real mensch for, is we're not going to proactively object to any decision by the Palm Beach sheriff, who should really be making no decisions at all about this. If the Palm Beach sheriff decides that he's going to let him out on work release, we won't say anything. We're not going to if they ask us, we'll object. But if we're just wondering, will we chime in and say you really shouldn't be doing this? No. Oh, okay. Well, you're a real mensch, says Dershowitz. A few months later, Epstein was released from the Palm Beach County Jail 5 months before the scheduled end of his 18-month sentence, which was really never even close to enough, obviously. Dershowitz told the Miami Herald that he did for Epstein what he would do for any client. I try to get the best possible situation, he said. That's probably true. He added that there was nothing unusual about the negotiations between Epstein's legal team and the U.S. Attorney's Office throughout the entire process. I don't know about that. Sloman didn't respond to multiple requests for comment, which Barry Weiss says you can't publish without that, which is a little odd. Now, every few minutes, the Instapaper version of this article keeps closing and then reopening and popping me back up to the top. So it's making things even worse. And it's maybe just that my computer doesn't really want to hear any more about Epstein. That could possibly be it. The possibility of working together is a quote and the title of the next section here. The prospect of future work complicated the relationship between federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida and Epstein's legal team. Acosta, who formerly signed off on Epstein's non-prosecution deal with the feds, recused himself from the case in December of 2008 because he was in discussions about going to work for the law firm Kirkland & Ellis, according to the Justice Department's internal investigation into the Epstein deal released in 2020. Kirkland & Ellis employed both Lefkowitz and another of Epstein's high-powered attorneys, former Solicitor General Ken Starr, in case you were wondering what happened to that guy. The report also showed that Acosta had met with Lefkowitz for breakfast in October 2007 and at a West Palm Beach Marriott. Okay. In a letter to Acosta, Lefkowitz wrote that Acosta had assured him that the U.S. Attorney's Office would not intervene with the state's attorney's office regarding this matter and not intervene in Epstein's state sentence. Acosta disputed that characterization in a letter to Lefkowitz in response, the report said, agreeing to those terms would equate to the imposition of a gag order. The response to Lefkowitz said, Epstein himself was in direct contact with one of the prosecutors who oversaw his case after he was released from custody. The Herald previously reported that Epstein met with former prosecutor Matthew Menschel several times in 2011, 2013, and 2017, according to Epstein's calendars released by the House Oversight Committee from material it received through a subpoena to Epstein's estate. The new Epstein Files include another new piece of information, an October 2010 email between Menschel and Epstein less than a year and a half after Epstein's sentence ended. And a year and a half since his sentence of a year and a half ended, even though it ended in less than 18 months. In every case, Epstein is interested in things that are under 18. You see, whether it's the number of months in his sentence or anything else for that matter. All right. So here's the email that came to light between the two of them. I very much enjoyed our talk the other night, Menschel wrote. That seems like an odd thing to be saying to him at all. I look forward to the possibility of working together, but regardless, let's keep in touch. Now, this is, again, Menschel, the former prosecutor, speaking directly with the guy who went to jail for sex trafficking, thanks to the prosecutor's office. I enjoyed our talk. Did you? I look forward to possibly working together. No, that would be bad. But in this case, the guy he was talking to had a lot of money. So, and things to cover up. A spokesperson for Menschel provided the Herald with a statement indicating that Menschel never met with Epstein during the time he was involved with the Epstein investigation at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that the law firm where Menschel went to work after leaving the government, Cobry and Kim, was one of several firms Epstein considered hiring to address the various legal issues, and that's why they were talking about working together. How interesting. There was nothing inappropriate about any of Mr. Menschel's communications or conduct, the statement said. Ultimately, neither Mr. Menschel nor anyone else at his firm represented Epstein or otherwise did business with him. They just said it would be a pleasure to do so if they got the chance later on. Okay, sure. So definitely an area that's worth keeping an eye on in terms of development in the Epstein case, relationships with the lawyers, and why the names of the prosecutors are blacked out in all of this stuff. It really, I don't know if we're going to ever get a decent explanation for that anybody can buy. All right. Other things that I thought we might be able to work into today's program. I don't know how many of them will be able to open. This computer is still choking to death, and there's just no opportunity to close the thing down and clean it back up again. I don't know. Let's see. As we head, and we're about midpoint of the segment, which of the longer reads we really have time for, and which one. I mean, if we start on some of these, it could take us the rest of the show, which might be fine, because trying to open up any other of these stories might just kill everything. Who knows? So, all right. The question is whether we head into the very long backgrounder provided by ProPublica on Russell Vogt, which seems like an interesting one, but might take up the rest of the show. Or I thought, well, why don't we try this? Before we do it, if the machine as it's still working will cooperate, a piece from Talking Points Memo, which might shed a little light on some of the behind the scenes nuances and various stories. One agency, this headline says, has been calling out Trump's illegal impoundment, and that may soon change. The impoundment, of course, the refusal by the Trump administration to spend congressionally appropriated funds, for which there's a legal obligation, obviously. And the impoundment having been found for every other prior president to have been illegal, but for some reason not working as designed with Donald Trump. Well, apparently one agency has been calling him out, and it looks like Trump is finding a way to make them stop. Okay, if the Instapaper version of this is correct, then we're looking at work by Emin Yücel at Talking Points Memo. But of course, I can't open up the page in order to verify that, so we'll just assume it's true. Throughout 2025, it says the Trump administration has, time after time, simply refused to spend funds that Congress appropriated. The obstinacy was without precedent in modern American governance. Congressional Democrats suggested it had put the country on track toward a constitutional crisis. Republicans, who controlled both chambers of Congress, largely did nothing, piping up occasionally to affirm to those who were paying attention that they had not entirely lost their minds was a relatively small watchdog agency housed within the legislative branch, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, which is interesting that they would be credited with this, given that the GAO largely failed in its mission to protect, the integrity of American government operations in the first Trump term, even before the first Trump term, when they basically said, yeah, sure, the lease of the old post office pavilion for a hotel by the Trump organization would be fine, because although he's president of the United States, we'll just consider it not to be a violation of the terms of the lease, prohibiting the leasing of the building to a government employee. He's not a government employee. He runs the whole thing. He's the unitary executive. He's the entirety of the executive branch, not an employee. He's all of them all at once. It says an employee, not every single one of them. That's okay, apparently, according to GAO. But, what can I tell you? It's a little weird. The Trump Department of Transportation suspending Biden-era grants for electric vehicle charging infrastructure was illegal, GAO said. The administration had also acted illegally when it withheld funds for Head Start, it said. And when it withheld funds for FEMA, GAO concluded it was illegal for the Trump administration to withhold NIH grants. So was their decision to freeze the federal cash allocated for the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences to support libraries, archives, and museums throughout the country. The agency conducted dozens of other investigations into suspected violations of the Impoundment Control Act during 2025, anyway. Now, it turns out we may soon get a very different GAO. Maybe one that was more lenient, like the one he had in his first term, which is weird. Comptroller General Gene Dodaro, who heads the agency, is set to complete his 15-year term on December 29th. Do I have this wrong now that I think about it? I'm wondering whether do I have the wrong agency in mind? If this guy's been in office for 15 years, you'd think they would have been objecting more strenuously. Maybe I feel like now I may have crossed the wires here in thinking about who it was that was approving the lease for the Trump Hotel and the post office there. But I don't know. We'll see whether ordinarily I would say I'd go look that up, except, like I said, the rest of the computer is frozen. So that's not happening. We'll just have to continue with the reporting from TPM here. We may very soon, though, get a different GAO. That part I think we can rely on their reporting for. I don't need to recall anything special or look anything up. So again, Comptroller General Gene Dodaro, who heads the agency, set to complete his 15-year term on December 29th. That's just 3 days from now, and has said he will retire. Dodaro's retirement comes following more than 5 decades of service to the agency that he's been leading for 17 years. Following Dodaro's retirement, Congress will establish a bipartisan panel to recommend a replacement to the president, President Donald Trump. I don't know if you've heard, but Donald Trump is the president. That's bad news. He will then nominate a candidate subject to Senate confirmation. It doesn't, I guess, have to be their recommendation, but either way, he has to submit his nomination to the Senate, or he's supposed to submit it to the Senate. We don't know. Maybe he'll just name a series of acting GAO administrators and see whether that works. Okay. Oh, yes. All right. That's it. Thank you very much. All right. Well, background production staff handing me yet another device so that I can read this. It was the GSA, General Services Administration, that I was thinking of that really defaulted in its responsibility to interpret the lease for the postal. All right, so it was very closely related, and there was a G and an A in this 3-letter acronym, and I guess that gave rise to the confusion. It doesn't make any particular sense to the General Accounting Office. Well, it's not that it didn't make any sense that the GAO wouldn't go along with Trump. It's that this 15-year veteran who was making such a stink about impoundment would have bent over backwards to allow the lease. That didn't make any particular sense. So, okay, it was GSA, and I mean, I'd never encountered Dodaro's name before, and I certainly would have when we read about it. GSA in 2015-16, all the way through 2020, completely dropping the ball on the emoluments clause and the lease of the post office as well. And this other, I don't know, perhaps easily confused acronym, if not actually confusing the agencies, if you're thinking clearly. If you don't have a head cold that's interfering with your ability to do a show, you would remember this correctly. Got it. Thank you very much. That clears it up. Now, back to the actual story being told here. Following Dodaro's retirement, remember the process is Congress, this is weird, will establish a bipartisan panel to recommend a replacement. I guess some sort of special committee of some sort that will recommend a replacement. Whether or not he takes the recommendation is up to him. But I guess they usually do take that recommendation because normally the nominee then goes to the Senate for confirmation. And if you ignore the recommendation of the bipartisan panel, then they would be less likely to defer to you on the confirmation, I assume, later on. But one of those interesting consensus-making mechanisms that sort of disguise the responsibility for the nomination. The president probably says, I make that decision, but of course the decision is made for you by the Senate and the House. It doesn't say whether it's bicameral as well, this panel, but my guess is that it would be a joint committee of some kind would handle something like this. But experts worry that the ostensibly bipartisan process will not be enough to force Trump to appoint someone who will live up to the agency's nonpartisan mission. which includes investigating improper, wasteful, and fraudulent use of the money Congress allocates. You know, waste, fraud, and abuse, except Trump won't actually want that to happen. And it's not clear that the Republican leadership in the two houses is actually interested in enforcing Congress's prerogatives here. It is likely that Gene Dodaro is replaced by a Trump lackey, Bobby Kogan, senior director of the Federal Budget Policy at the Center for American Progress, told TPM. Kogan worries that if Dodaro is replaced by a Trump loyalist, the agency will stop doing the, quote, important part of what they have been doing, which is investigations, public oversight, and accountability. GAO and its investigations are extremely important. Georgetown law professor David Super told TPM. Oh, Super. Thanks. Super. It's good to hear from you, Super. In many respects, it provides a better and more independent version of what the inspectors general used to provide, he said, referencing the watchdogs who sit within the many executive branch agencies and who Trump fired en masse in 2025. That makes it more difficult to do the work. Since Trump has gotten rid of the inspectors general, we don't have that independent site, Super continued. So having an independent GAO looking at things is extremely important, and certainly Congress would have a harder time doing its job without GAO. Since Trump took office in January, GAO has issued several decisions finding impoundment violations by the Trump administration. Whoever succeeds Dodaro will take on the ongoing probes around the same issues. Maybe they'll kill him, maybe they won't. Not that they've made a tremendous amount of difference, but at least they've been there. Hi, everybody. It's me, David, still your host for the Kagro in the Morning Show after all these years. Thank you for all your continuing support for the show. And if you're listening regularly and still thinking about getting on board as a supporter, well, the time is now. Patreon.com is the easiest way to make recurring subscription-style payments every month, all year round, to keep us going. patreon.com/KagroX brings you to our page where you can sign up with your monthly support. And hey, have you seen our clever new subscription tiers? It's easier than ever to sign up for, say, one crisp dollar bill for every information-packed 2-hour show. If you're the plan ahead type, there's even a year-long subscription program that saves you 15% on the cover price. Or it would if there was a cover price, or even a cover, for that matter. patreon.com/KAGROX. Thanks again for all your support. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I think I got enough energy to make it through one more segment. I probably should have quit the show in the first 5 minutes. Really, honestly, as soon as I woke up and said, "Oh, we're going to have this voice going on," but it was fun to try it out. People are appreciating it, I think, the voice anyway. And I think also the effort to bring a show and keep you company during what might be a holiday break, continuing holiday break for you. If you're a boxer, apparently. Boxing Day is a big deal. Or your name's Steven. Anyway, we left off in the middle of this GAO article. I think this is a relatively important thing to catch up on for us process heads here in the listenership. So, since Trump took office in January, we read this part just on the way out. GAO has issued several decisions finding impoundment violations by the Trump administration. Good for bringing evidence in court proceedings if they make any difference. You know, it's good to have this evidence, and it'll be a real loss if in future proceedings in the courts against Trump impoundment efforts, you don't even have the ability to point to the GAO reports and say, look, the GAO, the experts in this stuff in congressional appropriations and congressional spending, says this is an illegal impoundment. Let's begin by examining that at the very least. Now, of course, you'd still be able to point to it and say the letter of the law says that what Trump is doing is an illegal impoundment. But for whatever reason, the official entity, the GAO, that's in charge of looking at and staying on top of federal spending and making sure that it's being done on the level, is AWOL on this thing and has no report, or may even affirmatively say, no, for no particular reason, we think it's not a violation of the anti-impoundment legislation. But, so let's see. What else have they got to say about this? The GAO decisions led to the once relatively low-profile legislative branch. The reading skills are falling apart today with the head cold. The GAO decisions led to the once relatively low-profile legislative branch agency. All right, this is just it's a typo. To come under an unprecedented level of scrutiny. There's one too many twos, twos, in this sentence. We should eliminate one. The GAO decisions led the once relatively low-profile legislative branch agency to come under an unprecedented level of scrutiny. Thank you. The Trump White House's Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and maybe that will be our next segue. We'll go over to the Russell Vogt story because he's the head of the OMB. The Trump OMB and conservative lawmakers have been publicly challenging GAO's objectivity, actively trying to undermine it as the agency tries to do its job. It's a difficult thing to do, I guess, because remember how we learned how someone like Dodaro would get into this job. A bipartisan committee in Congress, and probably bicameral too, would make a recommendation to the president, who makes a 15-year appointment, which not lifetime, but it's obviously long-term, meant to span the presidencies of both parties, most likely, and be long enough that you could be removed from political pressure. The whole structure of the thing is meant to stand for the proposition that it's unlikely that such a person would in fact be acting out of partisan motivation. And for the time being, it's just a matter of Republicans saying, we ignore all of that and simply say the decisions they're making are unpopular with us and the president of our party, and we therefore accuse you of partisanship. And as every accusation is a confession, we plan later to actively work around the structure which is supposed to prevent this partisanship and force through a partisan of our own instead, who we later, when they make partisan decisions in our favor, and Democrats accuse us of partisanship and accuse this new designee, this new nominee of partisanship, we'll point to the formal structure of the GAO and say, but it's impossible for them to be a partisan actor here. Why, we would have had to have gotten around this whole process that's designed to keep the position nonpartisan, and would have had to have done it entirely on purpose and in contravention to the design of the statute. And we would never do that. So obviously, they basically later intend to don the sheep's clothing to disguise the wolf that they're going to put in there later. Anyway, so GAO decisions used to be considered nonpartisan, but now they've been busy attacking the incumbent as partisan. In my view, a well-functioning OMB that is serving the American people and has a good working relationship with the GAO, Micah Linden, Senior Policy Fellow at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth and former Executive Associate Director for the OMB, told OMB usually they are not partners, because GAO's job is to make sure the government is accountable and transparent, but they should be partners or sort of have a good working relationship. That was a confusing and mostly useless quote, and I think I read it correctly. Under the leadership of Russell Vogt, OMB has refused to cooperate in GAO investigations, stonewalling the agency's requests for information and calling them voluminous, burdensome, and inappropriately invasive. The worst thing for GAO is to look like you have an agenda. That's what concerns me about allegations like we're against the current president's agenda. We're not, Dodaro said in a recent interview. Our job, and most of what we're doing, is in response to actions they've taken. It's not things we're bringing up out of nowhere. The White House even pushed a constitutionally backwards rescissions package through Congress in July. The maneuver saw the White House strong-arm Senate Republicans into accepting Department of Government efficiency funding cuts to various agencies and programs, funding that many of the same lawmakers had previously voted to approve, but that the administration had lawlessly frozen. The Trump administration has really done massive amounts to destroy appropriations and budget execution, Kogan told TPM. And I think if Gene is, in fact, replaced by a lackey, that will be a major additional loss and will facilitate more budgetary lawlessness in the Trump administration. Yes, likely true. Yeah, I think what the game that they're playing here is if they can steal away the position that's meant to go in a nonpartisan process to a nonpartisan actor and give it instead to a partisan actor who will take a partisan part in the process, then they'll be able to say, cover up their partisanship by saying, no, he's occupying a nonpartisan position. Therefore, the position he's taking is nonpartisan. It's not, but that's the disguise that they'll assume. Despite issuing several opinions concluding the administration illegally withheld money, the agency under Dodaro has not taken action to sue the Trump administration for the violations it identified, despite some bipartisan support from congressional lawmakers. That's another important nuance in all of this. Normally, you would say, well, the GAO, being nonpartisan and seeing these violations, should be suing the Trump administration, but the fact is that they're not. So the Trump administration will use that, and Republicans will use that as a disguise as well. If they're not suing, they must not think anything is wrong. But of course, they're probably not suing because Congress is dominated by not only by Republicans, but by Republicans who are beholden to Trump personally. And it's within their power to say, as the founders assumed they would, in jealously guarding the congressional legislative prerogative, it's within their power to say, yes, we are of the same same party as the president, but this is a constitutional matter, and he's violating our prerogatives and powers, and so we'll authorize a suit to straighten out the constitutional scheme here. But because they are instead beholden to Trump personally and say, we won't initiate a lawsuit, it looks to the outside observer who understands the GAO's position by virtue of the lawsuits and files or legal positions it takes. If it's not taking a position that there's something wrong here, it must be that there is nothing wrong here, as opposed to they're just responding to political pressure not to say anything. And so people come away with the understanding that it must be legal and constitutional for these impoundments to happen, because if it wasn't, the Congress would surely say something in this form of the GAO. When they're not saying anything, that must mean it's A-OK, but it isn't. This is one of the huge mistakes that you see these things happen all the time, and it's kind of difficult to explain exactly what's going on with them, but people come away with the impression from reading perhaps newspaper accounts of what's happening that they fall back on the normal arrangement. If this were really illegal, the GAO would be saying something. But if in fact, let's say the Trump administration were to have people threaten the lives of the actors who would normally direct the GAO to say something, and so therefore they end up not saying anything, that doesn't whitewash the constitutionality of what's happening. It merely means people are under threat not to call it out. But for newspapers who report things that happen rather than things that don't, it will end up looking like, well, they said it's okay, or at least they didn't say it was not okay. And so therefore the presidents now have this power, unless of course one of these presidents should later become a Democrat, in which case, oh yeah, that's not allowed. Anyway, so let's see. Did we get this part on the record here or not? Right. The Trump administration has done massive amounts to destroy appropriations and budget execution. If Gene is replaced by a lackey, another additional loss and will make the budgetary lawlessness of the Trump administration that much worse, right? Despite issuing several opinions, including the administration illegally withheld money, the agency under Dodaro has not taken action to sue the Trump administration. That was the problem we left off with. People are already suing in many cases, Dodaro said, to explain away his decision, referring to individual lawsuits from groups who have not been receiving the funds Congress appropriated for them and their programs. We'll see what we need to do, he added. So he's not strenuously objecting to being phased out. But we need to be prudent and make sure that when we do it, we're in the strongest possible position to prevail, and also not anger my bosses in the Congress. For some, Dodaro's inaction around taking the Trump administration to court has left them questioning if the shift in leadership would be as consequential as they once thought. A year ago, I would have thought it was a very big deal, Super told TPM when asked about Dodaro's upcoming retirement. Now I'm not so convinced because the existing GAO has done so very little in this arena. That isn't in this area, but same difference there. But that's interesting, too. Like, again, he's having the same difficulty we are. Normally, this would be a big deal. Like, if you had a partisan GAO, that would be very, very bad for the appropriations process. On the other hand, given the fact that we basically have a partisan GAO now, I guess the difference between this partisan GAO and the next one isn't as big as I thought it was going to be. But that's only because the current one is actually more terrible than we previously thought. Okay. I mean, that should be part of the article. We gleaned it from the reporting, so I guess he's doing a good enough job here. But the quote wasn't super helpful. Anyway, it would be a different story if the GAO had been using its power under the Impoundment Control Act to sue over impoundments, or quickly identifying impoundments and calling them out in a way that was proving useful in litigation, Super added, but they have kept a very low profile on these issues, which is now an interesting thing to have read, given that the headline of this thing is, remember, there is one agency that's been consistently calling out the Trump administration. It's called the GAO. We spoke to experts who told us that the GAO really wasn't actually doing this very often, and so don't worry about it. So that's a little bit self-defeating, but you know, it's interesting that we've come around inside the context of this article. The one agency that's doing it is not doing it. But that's reminiscent of a lot of things. Actually brings me back to, once again, that conversation I'm so obsessed with among the Republican leadership in 2016 when Paul Ryan is convinced the only people standing up to the shenanigans in Europe and elsewhere of the Russians is us. And Kathy McMorris Rogers reminds him, actually, we're not doing that at all. Sort of similar. Okay. Well, let's see. Others like Lyndon, who we must have mentioned earlier and then lost track of in this article, say GAO's decision to stay away from legal action is likely centered around the fact that the current level of lawlessness is so unprecedented. Maybe that's it. The volume is too high. GAO suing the administration has never been a thing before because in the past, if GAO had said, you're impounding them, that would have been enough to get an administration to change its behavior. Good point there, Lyndon. That's clearly not enough now. What the Trump administration is doing is blatantly illegal, and it's breaking decades of precedent and understanding of how these things are supposed to operate, Lyndon added. The Trump administration has effectively already undermined the authority of the GAO, even with the current head, who is very good and very credible. How do you constrain or put limits on an administration that is ignoring the current limits? That's the problem with authoritarianism, Lyndon continued. It's why we should all be upset about things like impoundments. This is why stuff matters, because either the law applies to the executive branch or it doesn't. Well, guess what, everybody? It doesn't. I mean, it should, but it doesn't appear to be. Now, and everyone will point and say, well, the reason it's not applying is, I mean, how do we know that the law doesn't apply to the administration? The GAO isn't even suing to give us the opportunity to decide whether the law, or to observe whether the law applies to the executive. Yeah, because they're opting out of the fight, which leaves you with only one conclusion. The law on all practical purposes, for all practical points, does not apply to the administration. Would it apply if it was a Democrat? Maybe, because they might get around to getting the courage to sue for some reason. Maybe because that administration might not be authoritarian and threaten their lives. But it's interesting. The cloak you're able to wear. Well, their GAO isn't suing us, so technically that means it's okay. No, it just means that you've threatened the GAO enough that they feel uncomfortable and unable to bring the suits that they ought to be bringing against you. All right. Complicated, but worth the time. Also probably worth the time, but we won't be able to get through it all, is this very long piece from ProPublica about Russell Vought, Trump's shadow president. We've made the case, or we've made mentions in the show over the past couple of months, thinking of Stephen Miller as the shadow president. But increasingly, the case is being made that it's actually Russell Vought. But I guess when it comes to the propaganda arm of it and going on TV and saying the most outrageous, most bigoted, most horrific things, that falls to Miller. Vought has mostly avoided the spotlight, but hasn't avoided ProPublica or Andy Kroll, who I guess is the reporter for this piece. Russell Vought, Trump's shadow president. Let's get a bit of it on the record before the weekend, shall we? On the afternoon of February 12th, and this is not a super current article, this goes back to October 17th, but it's an important one. In the afternoon of February 12th, Russell Vought, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, summoned a small group of career staffers to the Eisenhower Executive Office building for a meeting about foreign aid. A storm had dumped nearly 6 inches of snow on Washington, D.C. Now everything's going to blank out and then come right back. There we go. This is a terrific piece of technology I'm working with here. The rest of the federal government was running on a 2-hour delay. Remember, this is February 2025. But Vought had offered his team no such reprieve. As they filed into a second-floor conference room decorated with photos of past OMB directors, Vought took his seat at the center of a worn wooden table and laid his briefing materials out before him. Vought, a bookish technocrat with an encyclopedic knowledge of the inner workings of the U.S. government, cuts an unusual figure in Trump's inner circle of Fox News hosts and right-wing influencers. Not only does he not look like them, but he actually knows what's going on in government. He speaks in a flat, nasally monotone, perfect for today, and with his tortoise-shell glasses, standard-issue blue suits, and corona of close-cropped hair, most resembles what he claims to despise, a federal bureaucrat. The Office of Management and Budget, like Vought himself, is little known outside the Beltway and poorly understood even among political insiders. What it lacks in cachet, however, it makes up for in the vast influence it wields across the government. Samuel Bagenstos, is that right? Bagenstos, an OMB general counsel during the Biden administration, told me, the reporter here at ProPublica, every goddamn thing in the executive branch goes through OMB. That's why it's the job that he wanted. The OMB reviews all significant regulations proposed by individual agencies. It vets executive orders before the president signs them. No, it doesn't. Not anymore. It issues workforce policies for more than 2 million federal employees. Most notably, every penny appropriated by Congress is dispensed by the OMB, making the agency a potential choke point in a federal bureaucracy that currently spends about $7 trillion a year. By the way, before I continue with this is 2 other items here in this paragraph that are similar, that remind me of what we were just discussing. Basically, the disguise that it allows you to assume, and which makes reporters believe everything is, if not on the up and up, then at least okay and blessed by a nonpartisan government actor in all of this, right? We have reviews all regulations proposed by individual agencies and vets executive orders before the president signs them. And we laughed and said, no, it doesn't. First of all, if it's Stephen Miller writing the executive orders, if he can get Russell Vought to either opt not to review them or to review them with a partisan eye. What ends up happening is you bring these things to the president, it gets signed. That has the trappings of looking like a normal government, although Trump makes it a little bit abnormal in the way he signs everything and then shows it around. But reporters are basically saying, I guess this is going to be effective now as an executive order, and it's going to change the way the government does business, because that's what executive orders do. And executive orders do that despite the fact that they're not legislation. But they do that mostly because we have also come to know, well, the contents of them will have been vetted by the OMB. And the OMB, it would be crazy. It would be insane for a partisan OMB to just rubber stamp garbage executive orders, because that would destroy the fabric of government and undermine the United States in general, domestically, internationally, everything. And that wouldn't happen because very staid and normal people are usually in charge of things like the OMB and drafting executive orders. If all that goes out the window, you merely have the trappings of office, but that's enough for these guys. And it's enough, apparently, for most of the people in the press to say, well, it seems crazy, but there must have been some vetting going on, because that's what happens with executive orders. And that's what OMB does, except none of it is actually happening anymore. So, okay. Now back to the reporting here. Remember that they also account for every penny appropriated by Congress, right, and dispense it through the OMB, meaning that $7 trillion a year moves through that office. Shalanda Young, Vote's predecessor at OMB, told me, if you're okay with your name not being in the spotlight and just getting stuff done, then directing the OMB can be one of the most powerful jobs in D.C. During Donald Trump's first term, Vote, whose name is pronounced Vote, by the way, and I am pronouncing it correctly, but thank you for the pronunciation guide. Could have used that for almost every other name ever on this show, but I happen to know that it is in fact pronounced Vote, did more than perhaps anyone else to turn the president's demands and personal grievances into government action. In 2019, after Congress refused to fund Trump's border wall, Vote, then not the director of the OMB, but the acting director of the OMB, redirected billions of dollars in Department of Defense money to build it. Later that year, after the Trump White House pressured Ukraine's government to investigate Joe Biden, remember, he got impeached for that, who was running for president at the time, Vote froze $214 million in security assistance for Ukraine. Everybody said Trump did it, but it was Vote that did it. And then Trump said, I do everything. So there you go. All right, well, we'll impeach you then. The president loved Russ because he could count on him. Mark Paoletta, who has served as the OMB general counsel in both Trump administrations, said at a conservative policy summit in 2022, according to a recording I obtained, he wasn't a showboat and he was committed to doing what the president wanted to do. That's a pretty good combination for Trump, right? After the pro-Trump riots at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, many Republicans, including top administration officials, disavowed the president. Vote remained loyal. It doesn't matter, by the way. Elaine Chao, for instance, disavowed the president, but now he put her on the board of the Kennedy Center, and then they voted to rename it the Trump Kennedy Center. So you tell me what's going on with Elaine Chao. He echoed Trump's baseless claims, that is, the Vote did, echoed his baseless claims about election fraud, and publicly defended people who were arrested for their participation in the melee. During the Biden years, Vote labored to translate the lessons of Trump's tumultuous first term into a more effective second presidency. Didn't really work, but it is a second presidency. He chaired the transition portion of Project 2025, a joint effort by a coalition of conservative groups to develop a roadmap for the next Republican administration. You know about that. Helping to draft some 350 executive orders, so they were pre-vetted before he was even OMB director. Regulations and other plans to more fully empower the president. Despite his best thinking and the aggressive things they tried in Trump 1, nothing really stuck, a former OMB branch chief who served under Vote during the first Trump administration told me. Most administrations don't get a 4-year pause or have the chance to think about why isn't this working. The former branch chief added, now he gets to come back and steamroll everyone. At the meeting in February, which opened this story. According to people familiar with the events, Vogt's directive was simple: slash foreign assistance to the greatest extent possible. The U.S. government shouldn't support overseas anti-malaria initiatives, he argued, because buying mosquito nets doesn't make Americans safer or more prosperous, although it actually does, but never mind that. He questioned why the U.S. funded an international vaccine alliance, given the anti-vaccine views of Trump's nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The conversation turned to the United States Institute of Peace, a government-funded nonprofit created under Ronald Reagan, which worked to prevent conflicts overseas, which is important to a guy who says he loves ending wars, but never mind all of that. Vogt asked what options existed to eliminate it. When he was told that the USIP was funded by Congress and legally independent, he replied, "We'll see what we can do." A few days later, Trump signed an executive order that directed the OMB to dismantle the organization. You just say that. And should the OMB dismantle the organization? Well, normally these executive orders are pretty well vetted. Who vets them? The OMB vets them. The OMB vetted the one that said that the OMB should dismantle the thing that the OMB director doesn't like? Yes, it did. Quote unquote did. Wink, wink. The OMB staffers had tried to anticipate Vogt's desired outcome for more than $7 billion that the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development spent each year on humanitarian assistance, including disaster relief, support for refugees, and conflict victims. During the campaign, Trump had vowed to defund agencies that give money to people who have no respect for us at all. And Project 2025 had accused USAID of pursuing a divisive political and cultural agenda. The staffers proposed a cut of 50%. Vogt was unsatisfied. We need a cut of 400, 500%, like Trump says. What would be the consequences, he asked, of a much larger reduction? A career official answered, less humanitarian aid would mean more people would die. You can say that about any of these cuts, Vogt replied. A person familiar with the meeting described his reaction as blasé. Vogt reiterated that he wanted spending on foreign aid to be as close to zero as possible, on the fastest timeline possible. Several analysts left the meeting rattled. Word of what had happened spread quickly among the OMB staff. Another person familiar with the meeting later told me, "It was that day that broke me." Want to read more about that day, that effort that broke him and the rest of the federal government? Check this piece out over the weekend.
netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I'll see if Scott can give you the link to it here. Oh, I might have to do the links today, actually, now that I think about it. Russell Vogt, Trump's shadow president. Andrew Kroll, ProPublica, October 17th of this year. Take a look. Now, stay tuned for Justice Putnam. We'll take you through the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy for Friday. Next, I'll spend the weekend recovering. You do the same.